All right, man, peace. So, first off, congratulations to the Philadelphia Eagles for being the Super Bowl champions for the 2017 going into 2018 season. Let's see what they have to say about it, of course. They're going to talk about it, and I'm going to chime in.
Let's get into it, guys. Huge congrats to the city of Philadelphia winning their first Super Bowl in franchise history and winning every postseason game as an underdog en route to the title. Stephen A.
Let me say this before Stephen A. speaks. Philadelphia, they should be very, very happy with that team, not only for their performance for the regular season, for the playoffs, but also it bodes well for the future. They have an exceptional roster on both offense and defense, and they won a Super Bowl getting a stellar performance from their backup quarterback. They probably have the best young quarterback in the NFL. This team should be Super Bowl favorites or number 2 in regards to chances for winning the Super Bowl for the next 4 to 5 years.
Why did Philly get the win?
Philly got the win because Nick Foles was absolutely sensational, because everybody collectively stepped up and they didn't shy away from the moment. And
their execution on offense was unbelievable. Nick Foles picked the New England defense apart, and that's not very difficult to do. It's not difficult to drive down the field on New England, but what they were able to do that very few teams have been able to do this season or even in the past is convert in the red zone. New England has one of the top scoring defenses in the NFL, and Philadelphia was able to put up 41 points on them without scoring a defensive touchdown or a touchdown on special teams. All 41 points came from the offensive side of the ball. So kudos to their coach, Doug Pederson, as well as the exceptional execution led by Nick Foles.
And more importantly, they got the victory because the New England Patriots defense took the night off. They picked the worst time of the year to look absolutely putrid.
Well, Bill Belichick took the night off when he decided to sit their best cornerback. I have no idea what he was thinking. Maybe he was getting a little too big for his britches. Maybe he has a personal issue with Malcolm Butler. Or maybe he just wanted to play too hard of a line due to Malcolm Butler possibly infracting on one of the team rules. But this is a Super Bowl. If Malcolm Butler, who allegedly missed a team playing because of the flu, you have to let certain things go depending on the situation. Even in the military, they will fuzz the line of discipline depending on the situation that is at hand.
We'll talk about Matt Patricia later on. We'll talk about Bill Belichick later on. You don't start Malcolm Butler. That doesn't make any sense whatsoever. These are all things that we're going to get into. But the Philadelphia Eagles were doing everything right. And the real key thing was that 14-play, 75-yard drive over a 7:01 span after New England took the lead 33-32. And the Philadelphia Eagles sat up there, didn't panic. Nick Foles was big time.
And the conversion on fourth and 5 really was a microcosm of how focused they were coming into the game. They were not going to be stopped. There was nothing that was going to occur that was going to stop the Philadelphia Eagles from winning this championship. So you have to give them all the credit.
Obviously, Jeffries and Clement and Blunt and Ajayi and Aguilar, everybody stepped up. It was something beautiful to see. I was panicking because even though I picked the Philadelphia Eagles Friday on radio, I was like, the hell with the Eagles. They're probably going to lose now because Alshon Jeffrey stepped out of the box and guaranteed the victory that made...
Yes, in the words of Stephen A., when I heard Alshon Jeffrey guarantee the victory, that gave me cause to pause, as Stephen A. would say. I did not think that was wise, but fortunately enough for that brother, he was able to step up and his team was able to cover his ass. And let me say this about Alshon Jeffrey. He has exceptional hands. In regards to judging the receivers in the National Football League, he's in the top 2 to 3% of receivers in regards to hands. He's had great hands throughout his NFL career. He's shown that he's always been able to secure the football from the time he was in Chicago all the way to now.
Made me very, very nervous. But in the end, what it comes down to is that the big play that needed to be made by Brandon Graham ultimately was made, the strip sack of Tom Brady that was recovered, and ultimately
the great Dow Green, for those of you who don't know who that is, in the Hall of Fame Blazer, holding the Lombardi Trophy. That is Dow Green. At one time, the NFL's fastest man. Back in the day when they used to have those NFL contests where you would see who could run the 100-yard dash the best, Darryl Green would win every time. I believe he was able to play corner in the NFL well into his late 30s. That was how exceptional he was. Darryl Green was no joke. The only player that I can remember running away from Darryl Green was Jerry Rice, who had freakish in-game speed, but who, when he ran the 40-yard dash, only ran a 4.6 or maybe even a 4.7, Jerry Rice. Darryl Green ran something like a 4.2. But I saw Jerry Rice run away from Darryl Green in the NFL playoff game, I believe in '92. Jerry Rice had the greatest in-game speed that I've ever seen on any football player, in contrast to how slow he was on the 40-yard dash.
The Eagles were able to go on to win. Everybody deserves props for the Philadelphia Eagles as far as I'm concerned, even though Tom Brady threw for over 500 yards and he was sensational himself. The biggest culprit to me, Max Kellerman, was the New England Patriots defense. I'm talking about they were awful as far as I'm concerned.
Well, they were bad, but the biggest culprit to me was Bill Belichick. Not only did he not start Malcolm Butler, but when he saw how bad his defense was playing at the half, he refused to make the proper adjustments, which is not like him. This is the same man, Bill Belichick, who decided to bring in Malcolm Butler in the middle of the Super Bowl 3 years ago. And he decided to not make that change back over to Malcolm, which tells me that it seems to be a personal issue between him and Malcolm Butler. Bill Belichick is one of those guys who likes to show people that no one is bigger than the team.
Practically all night long. It was really disappointing to see that.
Before you jump in real quick, I just want to mention you brought up Alshon Jeffrey. He's going to be joining us in just a few moments.
No, that's a bit. Alshon Jeffrey showed up to play yesterday, and that was obvious from early in the game. Stephen A., you said all that, and out of all those points, you hit one of them. That was the reason the Eagles won, and that one was the strip sack. That was one of the worst defensive performances by both teams in the history of Super Bowl.
I agree. As well as Tom Brady played last night, it was unbelievable to me. I said that before he was stripped, when he started to step up in the pocket, I said, Tom, what the fuck you doing? Get rid of the ball. He had two guys wide open, and I know he probably felt the pressure on his backside, so he stepped up in the pocket. It looked like he was trying to throw out to whoever it was out in the flat. I can't remember who it was, either Gronkowski or maybe a running back. He was going to hit somebody out in the flat, but he was stepping up into the pressure, and I was like, Tom, what the fuck you doing? And I could see nothing but bad stuff was going to happen. So when the strip sack came, I was like, wow. You know, it's amazing. New England Super Bowls are the most amazing Super Bowls of any team I've ever seen. Every last one of their Super Bowl games are so dramatic.
I mean, that was not a really well-played game. It was an exciting game. Brendan McCarthy, the pitcher, tweeted, I retweeted it last night, this is a Texas Tech game in the spring. You know, like that was a great, exciting, sloppy college football game that we watched yesterday, but it was incredible and dramatic. And the Eagles won for two reasons. It was so sloppy, and there was such a lack of defense on both sides.
I agree. It was almost like I liken New England unto Floyd Mayweather, where Floyd Mayweather is not going to let you dictate to him how he's going to fight. He's going to dictate to you how you're going to fight him. And New England allowed Philadelphia to dictate to them how they were going to play. It's like a fighter who's a great boxer who decides that he's going to engage in a slugfest with a slugger. It's not intelligent, it's not wise. And they just did not have enough bullets in their chamber. Even with the great Tom Brady on their team, they didn't have enough. Because even though Tom made a very, very poor tactical judgment when he allowed himself to get strip sacked, he should never have even been in that position, because you never take the field without your best soldiers on the field. It makes no sense. And when I saw Malcolm Butler crying when the national anthem was being sung, I said to myself, I wonder what's going on there.
That the first team who made a defensive play won the game. I mean, the Patriots' interception wasn't really a defensive playmaking kind of thing. Offensive player bobbles in, and it was kind of a 50-50 ball to begin with.
Doesn't matter. They made the play. All right. You would not have been able to make that play up in the air like that. So that was a defensive play. But there's no doubt about it that the prime defensive play that saved the game for Philadelphia was that strip sack. Because I have little doubt that Brady was going to march down the field. He was going to end the game with almost 600 yards passing, and people were going to call him as great as Michael Jordan, or maybe even greater than Michael Jordan.
The first real defensive stop, key defensive play made in that game was the strip sack. That team won the game. So the first time that happened, because there was so little defense played. And then the kind of more global look at it is the Eagles won because Doug Pederson has guts. When you think about that Nick Foles reception after Tom Brady on that trick play dropped the ball, Nick Foles, Pederson draws up. Think about the stakes for a second. In the Super Bowl, on 4th down at the goal line, you draw up a trick play with like levels of deception, and your backup quarterback catches it for the touchdown.
Well, there's a few levels to that play. Number one, Doug Pederson understands that he can't leave any bullets in the chamber in this game. He has a backup quarterback. You're going against arguably the greatest player in NFL history. I don't even think he's the greatest quarterback, but certain people will argue that he's the greatest player. I think the greatest player in NFL history is Jerry Rice. And the greatest quarterback I've ever seen personally is Joe Montana. But, I mean, it is what it is. If you want to choose Brady, you certainly can. And you would have a bunch of empirical data to substantiate your claim. But point being is this, to get back to the point. Doug Pederson knows that on 4th down at the goal line, you have to let it all hang out. Because even if you miss it there, Brady gets the ball back, and it's not that big of a loss, because at the end of the game, if you lose and you're Doug Pederson, you can always say, well, we had a backup quarterback. There's a little buffer there for Doug that would allow him to be super liberal in his play calling. He can pretty much not hold back, knowing that he has the excuse that Nick Foles is the starting quarterback for the Super Bowl. No matter how well or how poorly Nick plays, Doug Pederson will have that excuse. So he was right and correct and exact in doing what he did. Now, Belichick also tried to utilize a flea flicker involving Tom Brady as the receiver. It failed. Why is that? Because Tom is just not as athletic as Nick Foles, and the ball was a bit overthrown. Now, should Tom have caught the ball? Yes. Especially with as much as he brags about how pliable and how flexible he is, he should have caught the football. And he knew it when he dropped it. Because if he'd have caught that ball, he would have had a good 20 yards left. He had a good 20 yards of open space in front of him, even though he runs like a damn elephant.
Considering the stakes, that was maybe it was the funnest play I think called in Super Bowl history. I think that's the best way to describe it. It was the most fun you could, and it took such guts.
It was bold too, right? By Pederson, yeah.
Yes, it was Pederson's guts consistently, which is interesting because Schwartz seemed to lack those same guts that his head coach had. Schwartz's defense, they didn't blitz. I mean, at a certain point, why aren't you blitzing? Are you afraid that New England's going to score even quicker? How much quicker could New England have scored on you?
Because it's pretty much understood in the circles of defensive coordinators, especially great defensive coordinators, that you don't blitz great quarterbacks. Because quarterbacks like Tom Brady, they know what defensive scheme you're running before the snap. They don't get caught off guard. It doesn't make sense to try to blitz a quarterback like Tom Brady, because as soon as he reads the blitz, he's going to throw it over your cornerback's head, especially when it's pretty common knowledge that Philadelphia's corners bite on double moves. So all Tom is going to do is tell his receivers to run a hitch and go. It's going to be a touchdown. And everyone is going to be saying, Schwartz, why would you blitz an all-time great quarterback like Tom Brady? They love blitzes. It's like, once again, it's like a great boxer who's facing a slugger who's throwing wide shots and being super aggressive. You love that because it creates openings for you.
Send an extra guy or two, because that defensive front four was getting nothing on, no pressure on Brady. They didn't touch him. Forget about sack him until the strip sack. They didn't touch him. So the two reasons that the Eagles won that game is they were the first team to make a real defensive play. That won them the game. And basically, generally, Doug Pederson's guts. That's why the Eagles won.
Well, Doug Pederson definitely deserves credit because I think he outcoached Bill Belichick. I think Bill Belichick outdid himself.
I think that's the more relevant statement, Stephen A. I think that Bill Belichick outcoached himself. I think that he outcoached his damn self. I don't think that Doug Pederson necessarily outcoached him. I think that Pederson did a good job managing the roster that he has, and he has a stacked roster. You compare the roster of Philadelphia to New England. New England probably has one of the bottom half rosters in the NFL. Outside of Brady, Gronk, and Brandon Cook, I mean, how many of these guys on New England could start on other teams? Even Amendola will probably be in a diminished capacity on another team, but he fits in perfectly with New England. On another team, he would be a punt returner. He'd probably be more like a, what's this guy's name? The little dude that they got out there in Dallas. Like a Cole Beasley. Someone like that. Now, Amendola is a very talented receiver for the level of gifts that he has. He's maximized his gifts. But on another team, he would not be as productive. Within that system, with a quarterback as cerebral as Brady, he's able to maximize his output. But someone like Belichick, he has to utilize his best players. And Malcolm Butler is another one of those guys who could start on another team, maybe him and Gilmore. But their roster is not stacked at all. And for him to shoot himself in the foot, trying to be proud like that, he definitely has to take a lot of the blame for this loss.
I can't ignore the fact that Malcolm Butler wasn't in the lineup. It's something that we have to talk about today because this resonates so much more profoundly than I think people are giving credit for.
I agree.
Here's a guy that has played 97.8% of the snaps for you throughout this year. He started every game. He's been starting throughout the playoffs and then doesn't find out until right before the national anthem plays that he's not going to be playing. And Eric Rowe didn't find out until after the national anthem was played, that he would be starting. I think when you take into account the fact that chemistry, cohesiveness, knowing where your guys are going to be, knowing who you're playing with and what they can bring to the table, not to say that you don't know that about Eric Rowe, but I don't think that's something that could be ignored. And I think that warrants a bigger probe, more investigative work than we've received thus far. Bill?
Well, it's going to come out eventually because Malcolm Butler is a free agent. So eventually he is going to have to give his version of events, if for no other reason than to justify to other teams why he should be a viable pickup for them. He's going to have to tell his side of the story. We know that Bill Belichick is not going to give his side because Bill doesn't give a shit at this point. Bill is a made man. He does what he wants, and he's pretty much not answerable to anyone in his mind other than Bob Kraft. And even him, Bill Belichick might say, look, Bob, I did what I had to do. You don't like it? Fuck off.
Bill Belichick needs to answer for that. Matt Patricia needs to answer for why his defense looked so putrid. I look at the Philadelphia Eagles, and even though their defense wasn't impressive either, and I certainly am not trying to hide from that, I think about Malcolm Jenkins' hit on Brandon Cooks, knocking him out the game. I think that had an impact. It wasn't just the last play with Graham, but taking Cooks out mattered as well.
Agreed. Big time. Because Brady trusts Brandon Cooks. Brandon Cooks has done a good job for them. New England has a history of trying to bring in fast wide receivers who they think are going to help them stretch the offense, and then ending up throwing them on the sidelines because they don't learn the playbook quick enough. They don't understand how to adjust right before the snap. Like, you have to know how to adjust and be almost in a symbiotic relationship with Tom Brady, where you're feeding off of each other. The receivers on New England have to have a high level of synergy with each other and with Brady, and if they don't show that they can catch on quick enough, they are going to be relegated to the sideline. So Cooks has done a great job ingratiating himself with Brady in the offense from the start of this season, and his loss was a big loss.
Well, yes, Hogan stepped up, and Gronkowski and Amendola, they all had over 100 yards receiving. We get all of that, but having that deep...
Yeah, that was a bad hit because you see Cooks was looking everywhere except for where the hit was coming from. And those are the ones that finish you. And that was helmet to helmet also.
Threat to be concerned about. You never know what that could have done for Tom Brady. Is exceptional as he already looked passing over for over 500 yards. You just never know. Defensively, if you're the New England Patriots, Nick Foles, a backup quarterback, picked you apart and did what he wanted to do. You've got Pederson. You got Frank Reich, your quarterback coach. You got all of these things taken into consideration. Sorry, your offensive coordinator. You got all of that going on right now. And you look at the Philadelphia Eagles. Obviously, Doug Pederson did a hell of a job, had a lot of guts. But more importantly, he kept his foot on the pedal all night long.
Well, I think that they're giving Pederson a little bit too much credit for keeping his foot on the pedal. It wasn't like they were up 28-3. The game was relatively close the whole way. They got out to about a 10-point lead early, but the lead was never big enough for them to even think that they could possibly take their foot off the gas. Even if last year's comeback against Atlanta hadn't happened, they never had a lead big enough for them to consider taking their foot off the gas. So I think that they're giving Pederson a little bit too much credit for that. The credit I give Pederson is being able to take a stacked roster and do what he was supposed to do, which is win a Super Bowl, which is something that Andy Reid, had never been able to do with certain rosters that were just about as stacked.
He kept going for it. He went for it on 4th down twice, I believe, in the first quarter, if not the first half. So I'm looking at it from that perspective. And I'm giving credit where credit is due, but I also have to attach a strong level of culpability to the New England Patriots defense, because the bottom line is that they really didn't show up at all. And that was surprising. They bend a lot, but they usually don't break.
Agreed.
But you talk about a team that picked the wrong time to just take a night off. It was last night.
Listen, no, they didn't show up, but neither did the Eagles' defense show up. Neither defense showed up, and I get your argument, Stephen A. Basically,
right, but what is the last defense that has really shown up against Tom Brady? Like, let's be for real. Unless he's playing in Denver, he pretty much just slices everybody up. And even some of those games in Denver, the game that they played, the AFC Championship game that they played in Denver 2 years ago, they beat the shit out of that man. And he was still driving at the end of the game with a chance to take the lead. Like, at the end of the day, that's why I laugh at some of the people in the comments. Oh, Brady's overrated. And look, I can see if he was a marginal quarterback, but he's a great quarterback. You could talk about the deflate gate and all this other stuff. Do I believe that New England cheats? Yes, I do. I believe that when you're dealing with hyper-intelligent people like Bill Belichick, you always have to be wary, cognizant of certain stratagems, because he does utilize himself and his own brain to its maximum capacity. And that bothers a lot of people, because most people do not utilize their brain to its maximum capacity. Most people just sit back and they're content to level out at the mean, at the average. And Belichick is not willing to do that. And a lot of that resentment comes from the fact that Belichick is not going to sit back and be content. He's not going to get complacent. He is going to do what he has to do. And Brady is the same way. And you'll see that Belichick is not going to take the heat for anybody else. That is why when Brady got caught up in the Deflategate scandal, he said, look, go talk to Tom. Don't bother me with that. Because Belichick's attitude most likely is, if you're dumb enough to get caught, you got to go down on your own.
Basically, but New England has a great offense. Philadelphia with Nick Foles is not supposed to have a great offense, except that they beat Atlanta in a low-scoring game and then beat the brakes off of Minnesota. And that was in both games. Nick Foles was excellent in both games, and he was excellent again when they needed him yesterday. So, yes, you can call him backup quarterback. I predicted the Eagles' season was finished when Carson Wentz went down.
I agree. I said the same thing. I would not have bet on them winning the Super Bowl. If I was a betting man, I would not have bet on them.
I said Nick Foles was terrible. I really liked him in Arizona, and I thought he might be something under Chip Kelly, but he played so poorly with the Rams. And by the way, everyone acknowledged, look, man, what about the Jeff Fisher effect? Oh my God, what an effect. He has a terrible, terrible effect, especially on quarterbacks.
I agree with that. That's one thing that I will certainly give Stephen A. Smith credit for. Much of the vitriol that he has leveled at Jeff Fisher has certainly turned out to be credible. And the effect that Jeff Fisher has had on quarterbacks is unbelievable. How poorly he has made good quarterbacks look under his tenure, under his stewardship. He had Nick Foles and Jared Goff looking like they did not even deserve to be in the NFL. And once they get away from him, they're making the playoffs. They're winning Super Bowl MVPs. It's like, wow. I mean, how many naked pictures does Jeff Fisher have of the owner of the Rams, or maybe a certain family member of the owner of the Rams? He got naked pictures, because that's the only explanation I can conjure up as to why he kept his job for so long. He must be connected in some way.
And Nick Foles can play. If you run the read option, Nick Foles can get it done. You just have to. He doesn't go through progressions well. He does it slowly, and so you got to limit those kind of decision makings, those kind of reads for him. And that's what Pederson did for him. He went back to kind of the stuff that Chip Kelly was doing. And Nick Foles, you got to give him credit, executed it beautifully. So I think it's unfair to say, hey, that was a backup quarterback. New England's defense didn't show up. Neither defense showed up. And Nick Foles, you can label him whatever you want. We can, with your eyeballs, you can see that guy played very well yesterday.
Well, again, somebody's defense showed up when it counted. I think that matters.
Right.
I mean, obviously, the bottom line is you could say both defenses didn't show up. One showed up when it counted most. When Brady got the ball with over 2 minutes left and had an opportunity, because remember, they didn't kick for the extra point. They didn't go for the two, they went for the 2-point conversion and they failed. So ended up with you had a situation instead of a 6-point lead, you ended up having a 5-point lead, okay? All Brady needed to do was score a touchdown and you're the Super Bowl champions. And obviously, the strip sack took place. I'm just looking at it from the perspective that,
Well, it's the assumption that all Brady had to do was score a touchdown and they're the Super Bowl champions. It would have depended on how much time he took on that drive. Because if they would have went down the field, bang, 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 and scored with over a minute left, and Philadelphia would only have been down by 2, well, you know what? They probably would have been down by 1 or 8. 1 or 3, because Belichick would have tried to go for the 2-point conversion. Because they were trailing 38-33. So had they scored, it would have been 39-38, and he most likely would have tried to go for 2 to try to make it 41, and they would have either converted or not. So Philadelphia still would have had time to try to get a field goal to tie it and send it into overtime. And I think that with the way that New England's defense was playing, is a good possibility that with around a minute left, they could have gotten that done.
we got to make up our minds as to what we thought about Nick Foles. The reality of the situation is, even though we know he's had some talent, because of back in 2013 when he threw for 27 touchdowns and just 2 interceptions with Chip Kelly, all right, the reality is that he was looked upon as just a backup quarterback. He had proven himself to be a relative journeyman. Now, that clearly is not the case. Now he's a Super Bowl MVP, so everybody is engaging in revisionist history, doing what they want to do, and that's fine. But he wasn't Carson Wentz. It is one thing for Nick Foles to propel you to a Super Bowl. It's another thing for him to go 28 for 43, 373 yards, 3 touchdowns, catches a touchdown. By the way, that trick play that Josh McDaniels drew up where Tom Brady could catch, he showed his unathletic tendencies when he couldn't catch that football.
Stephen
All right,
A.
there you go.
Stephen A., I'll say this.
What Foles has done is he's put himself in the position to be able to decide whether or not he wants to stay in Philadelphia and stay the backup quarterback and be feted for the rest of his tenure there as a folk hero, or if he wants to, try himself on the market and see what he can garner there in the future. I believe that he has 1 more year left on his contract. So either way, he's going to have to be relegated to a backup quarterback next year, which I'm sure that he won't mind. He'll never have to pay for dinner or drink in Philadelphia ever again in life. So that's the good thing for him. But he seemed like someone who will be content to stay a backup quarterback, but we'll see.
In the stadium, the feeling definitely was. In the stadium last night, the feeling was when Ertz scored that touchdown, Nick Foles is going to have to score again, and it's going to have to be a touchdown because Tom Brady's about to march him right down the field. I mean, think about if I would have told you before the game started, New England would not punt once in the entire game. Tom Brady would throw for 500-plus yards, and Philadelphia would make a series of mental errors early in the game. What chance would the Eagles have had to win that game, right? But New England's defense also didn't show up, and as I said, the first team that made a real defensive play won that game, and that was Philadelphia.
The Philadelphia Eagles defense didn't show up for the most part against someone who is widely considered to be the greatest quarterback who ever lived.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, to me, it wasn't that big a deal. And as I've already stated, even had New England scored, they would have had to get a 2-point conversion just to be up by 3. So I think that Philadelphia would have understood that they would not have had to score a touchdown coming down the other end. They just would have had to execute well enough to get in the field goal range. Of course, if you can get the touchdown, get it. But the onus would have been on getting within field goal range. So getting to around the 20-yard line, 25-yard line at the best. Hopefully you can get there. if not out to about the 35-yard line, the worst. But, of course, that was not a factor because Brady got stripped. Made a very, very bad decision in the pocket.
The New England Patriots, with a defensive coordinator that is about to become a head coach, their defense did not show up against a backup quarterback.
But most of Tom Brady's yards, and we're going to debate whether or not Belichick got out coached. You say yes, I say no. We're going to do that later.
Yeah, I don't think Belichick got out coached by Pederson. I think he out coached himself.
Later in the show, most of Tom Brady's yards, or at least many of them, a huge percentage of them, came to receivers with when they were, there was no one within 10 or 15 yards of the receiver. Is that Brady being the greatest of all time, or is that Belichick's coaching? So there's a lot to get into in this game, a lot to get into, and you and I don't see it exactly the same way as usual.
So be it.
No question.
Yep, so be it. But congratulations to the Philadelphia Eagles. Let me see what Molly had to say here.
The thing that definitely stood out to me the most was how aggressive Doug Pederson was, Stephen A. Were you surprised? Because I think that was so crucial because you never know who's going to show up in the second half. The in-game adjustment, so they kept their foot on the pedal from the jump, and I think that was the difference.
Well, it was the difference, but it was no surprise because one of the things that people have praised about Doug Pederson all year long is that he's the antithesis of an Andy Reid. He didn't get cautious. He was somebody that kept his foot on the pedal. He was somebody that was going to continue to attack and go after it. And so that was the situation.
Well, the thing with Andy Reid is that Andy Reid has underperformed with high-level rosters because he had rosters in the early 2000s that were just as stacked as this roster. So once again, that's what Pederson deserves credit for over Andy Reid. But in regards to Andy Reid being too conservative, oftentimes he gets the blame for throwing the ball when he should be running it. So at the end of the day, some coaches are just not championship-level coaches. Just like in basketball, you have some coaches like a Rick Adelman or George Karl who can get your team very good, but they just can't win the big one. You have those same type of coaches in football. But once again, congratulations to the Philadelphia Eagles for being the NFL World Champions for the 2017 season. Peace.